It's time now for County-Wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Brad Miller as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives here in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's County-Wide.
Welcome to County-Wide. I'm Paul David. Very good to have you in studio today. Today we're going to take you out to Camp Verde, to Fort Verde State Historic Park, and we're going to talk about that. And we've got quite a few guests with us in studio today. And I think Sheila, you are the park manager, Sheila Stubler. Good to see you.
You too.
Welcome to studio.
Thank you.
I'm going to allow you to introduce our other two guests here today and tell us who they are and what they do for the park, because they're both very important to the park.
Absolutely. To my left is Carol Dvorak, and Carol Dvorak has been a volunteer with us for over 6 years. And through her volunteer endeavors, she actually became the president of a 501c3 nonprofit called Hold the Fort. And that group formed the nonprofit basically during the time when we thought that we were going to close with the budget cuts and everything like that. So they all stepped up and formed that group to help keep the park open.
Created that lifeline for the park.
Absolutely.
Marvelous.
And to my right is Mr. David Perryman. And he and his wife Barbara have been doing guided tours at Fort Verde for about 8 years now. And when you come to Fort Verde, if you ask for a tour with them and schedule it ahead of time, you'll have the best tour ever. So.
Now, how many tours a day do you do, David?
Well, whenever desired. They average about 2 a month.
Okay.
And we try to take people back to the 1800s when the fort was an actual repository of United States effort trying to make the farmers happy with the nomadic Indians who came through, who might someday, let's say, help themselves as hunters and gatherers. They might gather some of the farmer's corn and his goat, and he wouldn't like that. But our goal was to try to, the Army's goal was try to make everybody get along.
Gotcha. Now, do you have tours every day out at Fort Verde?
No, actually, because of staffing shortages right now, our goal eventually when we get fully staffed is to try to do guided tours, at least for sure on the weekends. But basically, if you want a guided tour, you just call up and make a reservation. And then based on availability, if the Perrymans are available, they're the first group we call. Then we call Carol and everybody else if they're available. And then if not, I've got 1 or 2 dresses at home, I'll throw it on.
Well, give us a little history lesson on Fort Verde. For those of us who may not know what Fort Verde is out in Camp Verde, give us a history lesson.
Well, Fort Verde is an original military fort from the 1870s. And before it had 22 buildings and it was sitting on 55 acres.
Much larger than it was.
Much larger, 5 times as large as it is now. We have 11.5 acres and there's 4 historic adobe buildings. But the neatest thing about the park is that the buildings are living, breathing artifacts. So it's
literally.
Literally. So there aren't many museums where you can actually walk through and see these buildings and know that they are living, breathing artifacts.
The people from the 1800s were,
well, the adobe walls
they were in those buildings, walking around, those scuff marks in the floor are from them.
Yeah, and
all that.
Well, in some of the flooring, like in the museum building, different parts of the flooring have been replaced. Just like your own home where you had to replace it.
They touched those walls as they walked through.
But the walls and speaking of that, some of the adobe walls that have started crumbling, we're getting around to doing our adobe stabilization project coming up here. So
we'll have to talk about that then for sure.
Yeah. So, but that's the most amazing part is that you're actually walking through the footsteps, but you don't have to wear the period clothing like they did back in the days.
Okay. So let's go back to the history of the fort. Then when did it first become established again?
Well, it was occupied primarily 1871 to 1891. There were 2 other posts prior to that. There was another post that was by Clear Creek, and that was just a temporary post. And then the second post was called Camp Lincoln, and it was by the confluence of Verde River and Beaver Creek. But there was a lot of malaria due to the beavers that were damming up the river there.
Oh, wow.
And so due to malaria, they had to leave that post, and then they found the area that's now called Fort Verde. So temporarily, when they first had it called Camp Lincoln, they contacted Washington and said, due to malaria, we're leaving this area, we're going to look for another area. And then when they did that, then basically Washington said, well, there's 50 Camp Lincolns, change your name because we don't know which Camp Lincoln you are. There's so many Camp Lincolns. So they changed their name to Camp Verde, and then they situated themselves where Fort Verde is, and later on, after they had occupied that fort, then they changed the name to Fort Verde to show permanence. So, and then that's where they were.
Tell us a little bit about General Crook.
Well, he was a brigadier general in charge of Fort Verde, and he was actually the one who recruited the Indian Scouts up at Fort Apache in that area. He recruited them because they knew what the I'd say the habits or where people the style of fighting that they were used to, and so and basically if it wasn't for his Indian Scouts, they would probably not have been as successful as they were.
Now, was he at the fort the whole time from the beginning to the end,
No,
or
he was
stationed
at the territorial capital in Prescott.
Okay.
So so he didn't really sleep at Fort Verde. I mean, he may have passed through and that kind of thing, but he did have a cabin up north in Fort Apache.
Wow.
So and these guys can probably tell you a lot more detailed information as they do wonderful guided tours. If there's any other things that you want to add to that.
How long is the tour?
Well, it depends upon how many questions are asked. Let's say it should,
Okay, well, there's one for you.
should take about 20 minutes.
20 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of the tour, David,
Well,
when you give them?
Well, I'm mostly in the museum, and I bring up objects of that period. For example, one of my favorites is the side saddle. Women in those days, dictated by fashion, would ride side saddle. Not an easy way to ride. Let's say the sergeant said, "Ma'am, throw your leg over that saddle. We got to get out of here. Them Redskins are after us." She might think, "Oh, I just can't do that. Fashion dictates I must ride side saddle." Many of the ladies got smarter, though, and began sewing an artificial leg under their skirt. So while they were really riding across the saddle to get away from the Redskins, it appeared that they had a leg just flopping. It was, women are not smarter than men. They're much smarter than men.
Yes,
and they
yes.
invented this. And so you see them with the side saddle. This is one of my favorites. We've got an actual side saddle we show. And we have all sorts of sample uniforms, discussions of how the soldiers had to, for example, on a Saturday, the soldiers all had to get in their dress uniform. Most of the time they were in the heat of Arizona, they were in a canvas uniform, made the soldiers of Fort Verde perhaps the dirtiest soldiers in the Army at that time.
I bet. Amazing, amazing. And Carol, you came along when was it, you said 2009. 2009 was when the state was going to close Fort Verde because of funding.
Yeah.
And then you got whiff of that, and no way. You weren't going to let that happen.
No. I was actually at the fort from about 2007, so I had a feeling for what was going on and enjoyed very much learning the history and greeting people and so forth. And then the state had all the changes in 2009, financially that is, and there was news the fort would close. So a group of us got together and formed a 501c3. It's still in operation. It's called Hold the Fort.
Hold the
literally
Fort.
what we're doing. And we have been volunteering hours and also making money through various ways and keeping it in Camp Verde and in our fund and giving it directly to Sheila for things that she requests.
Keeping the fort open.
And keeping the fort open,
Right.
helping in many ways. For these
Your outfit looks far more comfortable than David's outfit. I mean, we were talking before the show, David, he's got a wool jacket, wool vest, wool shirt, wool underwear, wool pants. He would be hot, I would think, on a day like today where it's supposed to hit 91 degrees.
Yes.
You said this is a homemade dress.
Yes, and this is, pardon me, I wear different dresses for different occasions, but this is the lightest weight one that I have.
And what would that be worn for?
This would be a day dress.
Okay.
In those days, and it's not particularly formal, but it's cool and made of cotton. And most of the clothing that we have that people can borrow are made of cotton. They would have been worn though, many layers and many skirts and long sleeves, gloves, which I don't have today.
That's fine.
And more comfortable hats. This is more a formal hat than they might have worn each.
Gotcha. Now, if I was going to volunteer out at Fort Verde, would I give you a call, Carol, to volunteer and then to make a donation to make sure the fort stays open?
Yes.
Okay.
I would be the one probably to call.
Okay, all right. And then I imagine your information, the number to Fort Verde is 567-3275. So that's probably the number we should just stick with, and people can call there and then get information about David Perryman and the tours, and Carol, you about what you need for your the 501c3 and all that good stuff. So maybe we should do it that way. We're late for our first break. Let's take that. Okay. Time's going by fast. Stick around. We're talking Fort Verde State Historic Park out in Camp Verde. I'm Paul David. This is Countywide. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
I would steal pills from my friend's mom.
We talk about all the common drugs, but never prescription medication.
I was addicted to pills.
Had I more knowledge, I would have done things differently.
Secure your medications and talk with your kids. Visit drugfree.org.
Thanks for calling the GED Pep Talk Center. Jerry Siller speaking. Your level 7 in-your-face pep talk.
I can keep pushing you. Believe me, I'm good at it. But at some point, you're going to need to start pushing yourself.
See, once you've got your GED diploma, you'll feel so good about yourself.
You tell them. You can't change your past, but you can definitely change the future.
That makes me so happy, I'm ready to bust out a dance.
Mr. Trejo, can I transfer this guy to you? My gentle technique isn't really working. You need something a little more
persuasive.
Yes.
You listen, and you listen good.
Hey, where's my sandwich? Terry? Terry!
Take it from me, the King DMC. It's a real cool thing to get your GED.
Get that diploma!
Now hold on and we'll find you free GED classes. Capiche?
Whatever motivation you need, we've got a pep talk for you. Get your GED pep talk and find free classes at yourged.org.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. That ember can ignite and destroy your home or community. You can't control where that ember will land. Only what happens before it does. Visit fireadapted.org to learn how you can help protect your community from wildfires.
Ronnie had huge aspirations.
He knew he could get pills in the community.
He found his body in an apartment in Telford.
I never thought my son would take prescription drugs without a prescription.
Secure your medications and talk with your kids. Visit drugfree.org.
Welcome back to Countywide. Great to have you in studio today. We're talking Fort Verde State Historic Park in Camp Verde. If you've not been there for a long time, you need to go back out there and check it out. 567-3275 is the phone number, and I think the easiest way to find it is I Googled Fort Verde State Historic Park, and it popped right up on the main page. You have an awesome video on the front page, and it just popped into my head. I was watching it just before the show. One thing I thought was very interesting, and I have been completely, I guess, blinded by Hollywood. But an interesting thing I thought about that video was that they talked about there are no walls around the fort. And I always thought when I drove through Camp Verde and I saw the fort sitting there, I thought they must have torn that wall down. Must have had this great big pine tree wall that they had all the way around it, you know, and you'd have soldiers up in the corners watching for enemies and stuff. But apparently that was not the case back in the day.
No, actually, of the 43 forts in Arizona, not one of them had a stockaded wall around it. So
that just shocks me.
It is a Hollywood myth, yeah.
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 It was just an open, it described it as an open community, and it kind of showed an aerial shot of the fort and just the buildings and how it just sat out there. And it was like a little town.
Well, and if you think about it, too, if somebody was looking for food, they would go right to the farmer because that was the main source of the food. The military had to actually buy the food from the settler. So basically they wouldn't have had all the extra food there if somebody was hungry and needed it. So that's part of the reason why the forts were never attacked. And plus the military, they all had their weapons. And so it would not be a main source of food for them. Right.
Yeah. It'd be a dangerous situation to come up on all those soldiers in the fort like that. Now, Camp Verde kind of grew up around the fort, right? Was the fort established there a long time, well before the Camp Verde settlers were there, and the Verde Valley settlers, or did they kind of come in afterwards?
When the miners started moving out to Prescott, that's where people started basically deciding to move out here because they heard about a thing called gold and silver, and they decided to come and try to make a better life for their family.
And that's when conflict started. So.
Yeah, and Mr. Perryman can probably elaborate a little bit more if you'd like about that.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. There's a little low knee-high fence, and unlike a Hollywood movie with, as you mentioned, the huge stockade firing down and firing up and so on, they didn't do that at all. There never was a firefight at Fort Verde. The Indians were informed, if you put your foot on the fence, the sentry will shoot you. The Indian did not want to be shot. He was not there to be shot, so he didn't put his foot on the fence. There was no conflict there. The General Crook, as we understand it, now we weren't with General Crook, mind you, we're reenactors, but we understand that he tried to colonize the Indians and put them in territorial groups up and down the river, and he was doing fine, and he taught the Indians how to produce merchandise that could be bought by the Army. Well, it's our understanding that real merchants of that era did not like that, because they wanted to sell stuff to the Army, but they used their influence in Washington. They didn't bother locally at all, and they made a transfer of ownership, moved many Indians away, and the scouts and so on. So as a result, the fort for a time was unstabilized.
Well be.
And then in due course, about 1890, the Indian problem was felt solved, and the soldiers moved away, and Fort Verde just sat there. So they sold the property through auction to merchants. Many people lived there, but who wanted to live in a house without electricity, running water, or telephone, what have you?
Right.
So pretty soon the buildings were no longer used, and the farmers helped themselves, let's say, you know, get a hold of that window, Mildred, and they took it out. But in due course, it's been restored, and if we had more funding, we would restore it even more right now to get it back the way it was.
Right.
But the need for funding never vanishes.
Right. Yeah, that's always going to be there. It is always going to be there. We have some projects that you're working on right now that we want to talk about.
Yeah, we mentioned the adobe walls at the fort, and we have an adobe stabilization project that I think it's been since about the last 6 or 7 years. We were documenting, taking pictures of where the adobe was crumbling, and then we were sweeping up the adobe that was crumbling. And
the house is actually falling around you, and you're sweeping it up.
More so the museum building, yeah, the administration building. And so, so the thing is that we're finally at that point where we have an adobe specialist who's been approved by the State Historic Preservation Office, which is known as SHPO. And so that's one of the projects that we're working on right now. And if you do come to Fort Verde, if you look at the back side of the administration building, it looks like all of the whole land was just scooped up. And it's a grading and drainage project also that's tied into the adobe project. And what it is that when it was raining, the water was puddling underneath one of the back corners of the adobe building, and therefore it was saturating into the soil underneath the building. And so it's an important project because literally you can see where the adobe is crumbling away, and it's damp underneath because of that excess water. So we're happy that we're finally moving forward on that, and we're thankful to have the support of the people that are making it happen.
Right.
So, but it's taken a lot of volunteers and lots of photos and pictures to get action on that. So, and it's imperative because if we lose any part of the building or buildings, that is the park, and that's our history. And
that is our history.
We have a very important responsibility to maintain it and make sure that it doesn't crumble and disappear.
You've got kids programs out there too.
We do. We have a junior ranger program, kind of like all the other state parks, and you can earn a button that you can get. And,
now, we did not get to talk about that last week, so tell me a little bit about that, because it's almost like the Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, where there are pins at each state park. Tell me a little bit more about that.
What we do when youth come through our park, we ask them if they want to do junior ranger program, and basically it's a scavenger hunt, so it's a sheet of paper that folds out threefold, and then there's trivia questions that they have to go through the homes across the street, and here's a little picture of the card of what it looks like. So they go through one of the homes, they look into the viewport, into the rooms, and the rooms are all furnished just like they were 143 years ago.
Wow.
So they have to find the answers to the questions. And then there's other activities like a maze, and one where you can write their name in Morse code and that kind of thing. And then when they come back, they take the Junior Ranger pledge, and then we swear them and make them the Junior Ranger, and we give them the button, and then they can collect the button at all the different state parks. And so that poster actually has all the different buttons surrounding it, so that you can collect all the buttons.
We had the poster on the show last week, but we did not get a chance to talk about it, so I'm glad you did, because that should interest a lot of kids. It'd be really neat to take your kids to all the different state parks and have them to win that button. We have to take another break, okay? Okay. Phone number for Fort Verde State Historic Park is 567-3275. Stick around, Countywide. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
So who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice. And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
We couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
I'm one unlucky guy. The chance of being involved in a robbery is 1 in 757. The chances of being struck by lightning 1 in 750,000.
Please fasten your seatbelts for unexpected turbulence.
The chances of being a victim in an airline crash 1 in 29 million. Hey, could I get some peanuts? The chances of being involved in a car crash are far greater than lightning strikes and plane crashes. And if you are texting while driving, your risk of crash increases 23 times. Now, I may be an unlucky guy, but I don't have to be part of that statistic, and neither do you. Drive responsibly.
There's no place like home.
Getting home safely is just a click away. But making sure your child is in the right seat is just one of the steps down the road to safer travels.
I don't know how it works.
Find the right seat for your little one's age and size.
We've done what you told us.
There's no better way to get home safely. Know for sure that your child is in the right seat. Get all the facts at safercar.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Countywide. We've got a couple minutes left in the program, and there's two big things we want to hit. First of all, the phone number again, 567-3275, 567-3275. Carol, we want to make sure, because it's the volunteers, as we mentioned just before while we were taking this break, you mentioned Sheila, it's the volunteers that have really helped a lot to keep this fort open and available to visitors from out of state, in state, and for the locals here as well. It is, like you said, a piece of our history. It's what made the Verde Valley. But you need volunteers always, right?
We do, and there are many different things a volunteer can do. They can work inside in the office, greeting people, giving the history. They can work in the archives. They can take tours, take people on small tours of the museum, as well as the Perryman's larger tours. They can help with projects outside, as far as maybe some painting or some other construction, small tasks. And all you'd have to do is just go into the office and get a volunteer packet and read it and sign it. And the hours are pretty flexible, but normally they're a half day. So like 4 hours in the morning or 4 in the afternoon, one day a week. And we're open for 5 days at this time.
Thursday through Monday.
Correct.
Closed Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay.
That's correct. And so, yes, volunteers are very welcome. And if they can only come for 3 hours, that's all right too. We're happy for any help we can get. Okay.
So the number again for the Fort Verde State Historic Park is 567-3275. You said somebody needs a special help with Dutch ovens.
Yes, Hold the Fort actually has, one of our members is our Dutch oven cook, and he does all the historic cooking at our 3 events a year, our 3 big events, and he has a whole crew of cooks that come out and help him, and it's all day for usually one whole day and maybe part of another day, and it's exciting and interesting. He'll have 15 or 16 Dutch ovens going sometimes at once.
Oh, it's so good too. Dutch oven food is so good.
That's a very rewarding job, because then you can even eat what you've made.
That's right. That's right. That is right. Okay, we are out of time. David Perryman, nice to meet you.
Nice
Sheila
to meet
Stubler and Carol Dvorak. Very nice to see you. 567-3275, Fort Verde State Historic Park in Camp Verde. If you've not been there for a while, go back and check it out. I'm Paul David. That's today's Countywide. We'll talk to you again next time.